Hey, Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jason. Good to talk to you again.
Mark, it has been so long since we were sitting in a DC bar, enjoying a beer together, getting to know what we were up to. When was that? Was that like 2012?
It would have been, yep, probably 2012 because I've got two boys, and I think my first one was very young, and we went to visit my brother in Washington, D.C. So he was born at the end of 2011. So it would have been 2012. And, I've added another kid, and you've since added three. So
I know
life has continued to go on.
we're making people over here. No, that was such a good time getting to know you and your history with the sport, and now you're doing such amazing things with None to Run that I thought it would be a really good opportunity to sit down with you and talk about some of the many beginner oriented running questions that often come across my desk. And you have a very large community of new runners. So I thought you'd be a really good person to talk about some of these things. So for our listeners, these are listener questions that have come in that are a little bit more oriented toward, the person who might be running, for 6 months or a year, or who is just toying with the idea of starting to run. So I'm excited to hear what you think about these questions, Mark. They are very wide ranging. So we're going to jump all over the place. And that's a good thing. That'll keep things interesting. So let's start a little bit more with heart rate and pacing and effort. If someone's just getting started with running, I think one of the big questions is, how do I know how fast I should be running? And the question is, should I rely more on heart rate, on pace, on effort? What do you think?
For for me, my thoughts, I mean, yours might be different, but I like to get people to learn how their body works and learn what their efforts feel like. So and that happens through feel. I think for me, like I sort of tell my runners to, go slow and judge your effort based on, a 10 point, perceived effort scale. If they want to get a little bit technical, where 10 being, all out sprint, you can't go any faster, any longer, and one being, basically like a walk. So I err on the side of caution and get my beginner runners to go, you know what, you want to be down in like the 3, 4, 5 area. If you start jumping up past there, it's probably too much too soon. And of course, the standard sort of talk test is a great one too. If you find you can't talk, in a full sentence, you're gasping for breath, you're probably going a bit too fast. Of course, there's a place for those type of efforts, as you progress into wanting to improve your speed, 5K, 10K, and so forth. You introduce tempo workouts and intervals and so forth. But for beginners, I try to tell them, use that talk test as a guideline, and it's a good starting point, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good starting point. And I completely agree that effort is probably where most new runners should really focus on because, if they're focusing on pace, well, what's an appropriate pace for them? They really have no history or experience to answer that question with, right? So that aspect of things is very clear to me. Pace is almost irrelevant because you don't have any race history, you don't have any training history. So how do you know how to pace yourself? You can't use pacing. You can't use actual minutes per mile or minutes per kilometer. And heart rate is an interesting one too because so many new runners, their heart rate's going to be really high most
Right.
of the time anyway. And I've always found that even if their heart rate's really high, their perceived effort might be kind of low. And many of these runners just need to do a lot of zone one, zone two, maybe flirt with zone three a little bit. But keep it to like a first date level. Don't go overboard. And and through all of that zone one, zone two, maybe zone three running, that's where you build the aerobic fitness to allow your heart rate to be a little bit more manageable during those easy efforts. So that's sort of my thought process on things because, the new runner is such an interesting case study, right? It's this person who doesn't have the experience to use pace and doesn't really have the fitness to use heart rate. So we have to just rely on how you feel. Isn't that frustrating though to the new runner because they want a more concrete answer? How do you deal with that part of things?
It is. And, it's so common too. Like people, they do their first run and they look at their pace and they're automatically, looking at others, in the community or wherever they're seeing other runners on Strava, Instagram, and they're looking at their pace and they're comparing. And yeah, it takes time and education, but I try to educate people that everyone's on their own journey. You can't compare yourself to others. um and the running is a journey too. Like there's no finish line, so you're better to start slow and build yourself up, slowly, progress slowly, minimize your chance of injury, as opposed to trying to get as fast as quickly as possible. It's not sustainable from sort of a habits standpoint and a mindset standpoint, but also physically. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in taking things slow, recognizing that running is such a long-term endeavor that you really can't push things too fast in short time periods. Now, you have mentioned sustainability and habits, which I think is some of the most important aspects of starting to run and being a new runner. How do you develop the consistency, the habit of running regularly if you're not used to exercising regularly? Because I think this is where a lot of runners get tripped up in creating that consistent habit, because that's really the key, right? I always say there's no secret to becoming a good runner, but if there was, the secret's consistency. That's the secret sauce. You've got to run consistently because if that's not there, nothing else can be there, right? So, how do we get started with that very important concept?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think I've stolen that term from you. The secret sauce is consistency. And yeah, that's the big question. How do you build that consistency? And sort of what I've learned, and also through really good resources and a book called Atomic Habits, which probably many readers or many of your listeners have read, um, is you start out really small. And in my None to Run group, the first run in our beginner plan is you're literally doing intervals of 30 seconds of running. And for many, they're like, this is too easy. And that's kind of the point. It's to make it easy. So you want to go do it again. Because if you make it too hard, now I've been a victim of this. I've actually started, doing a bit more running. I got more into biking, but I'm doing more running now. And it sometimes sucks to go out and punish yourself time after time. And you're just like, I don't want to do a hard workout. It's, I'm in Toronto, it's minus 10 degrees Celsius out. I don't want to go out and kill myself. So for me, I've had to be more gentle on myself. Like, you know what? Go out, and you're better to go out and have an easy workout than you are, going out, killing yourselves and not wanting to go for another week. So it's really just starting small and giving yourself the permission to slow down, and consistency trumps everything. It's just get out on all your runs and just ignore the pace. Some runs will feel good, some will not.
I was listening to a habit expert a while back talk about how to create the habit of flossing your teeth every day. And the advice was to floss one tooth. That's it.
Yeah, that's in James Clear's book too, I think, that reference.
Yeah, the Atomic Habits book. And maybe that's where I got it from. I was probably listening to him talk about something like that. But it's so interesting how you have to start somewhere, and it's often not really where you want to be starting. You want to be running the 30 miles a week, doing the long run, the sexy workout that's going to look good on Strava. But if you are struggling to build the habit, it's so much more beneficial to take this really sort of easy approach to your training. Like, let's make most days easy so that we actually get out there, so that we experience fewer setbacks. And that, I think, is the most effective approach, because once
Yeah,
you make it easy and you just kind of take these little bites out of this whole project of being a runner, after a couple of weeks, you're like, okay, I'm doing this regularly. Now I can take it up a level. Now I can start running a little bit more or lengthening those run breaks. And it just becomes a lot more easy to do.
yeah. No, I tell my runners too. Like, if you've got your running clothing on, your running shoes laced up, and you get out your front door, like you've already won. You're yeah, that's the success, big check mark, and then anything else that happens over that, you're good to go.
Now, Mark, I'm curious, what if someone is just starting to run after a very long break from running, let's say a couple years, and they're curious because they're thinking about their past training history, their past fitness level. What distance should they start with for their first run back? And then, how many days a week is an appropriate number of days for this kind of runner?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, it's a tough one. I get a lot of people come to me and and I'm curious, like they'll email me their story and their running history, and they'll say, "Yep, I used to run, half marathons all the time, and 10Ks, and I used to run this pace." And I'm, take a step back. I'm kind of like, why are you emailing me? Like, all this, but where I think a lot of people, runners that have had a history of running, they get to know their body and what it takes, and how long it takes to build up. Like we, going back in our conversation. So fortunately, those ones, they have a bit of background and they know it takes a while. So again, I get them to ignore your past successes, because maybe 10 years has passed by since you've run, or maybe you've gained 10 pounds, 20 pounds. You're working a high impact, busy job. Life takes over. But again, the message to them is like, be gentle on yourself, start slow. They know how long it takes to get back. I recommend for most of them starting running like 3 times a week, and then sprinkle in, and never running on consecutive days. So always take a 1 day off in between. They can do some activities in between, like, it's just not running. Do swimming, do yoga, do some stretching, that type of thing, but never run on consecutive days. And start to drip in a little bit of strength training, to get that base stronger, help you minimize the chance of injuries. And sort of my rule of thumb for that is you can do the strength work on the same days as you run. Just don't do it before you run. Prioritize your run. You can do it after, or do it on your days off. So, yeah, to answer your question, it's usually I sort of get them, 3 days a week. And distance, I mean, yeah, that all depends on what kind of fitness, of course, they're coming in with, how much running they've done before, that type of thing. But for real beginners, like, it's usually not even distance based. I like to recommend doing it time based, because your body only knows how long it was out there pounding the pavement. So if once you allocate a distance to a run, I find people all of a sudden want to attach a pace to that distance, cover that distance faster. So for me, for the beginners, I just say run by time.
Yeah, I can't really agree more with that. I think the distance based training approach is probably, in my opinion, the best training approach, but not for beginner runners because of exactly what you said. As soon as you say run 3 miles, they're going to say, "Ooh, I wonder if I can do that in under 30 minutes." And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden it becomes a performance oriented type of run when that's not what you want whatsoever. You really just want it based on that easy effort, 3 to 5 out of that scale of 1 to 10, like you were mentioning before. Um, and yeah, I mean, when you say time based, are you saying like, okay, let's go out for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, or is it longer than that?
Yeah, I mean, the first run, sort of for the beginners that come through, my plans, it's 25 minutes total, and so that includes a 5 minute warm up walk. So it's 20 minutes of run walk. So they're on their feet for 25 minutes, and and I get people to pay attention to not necessarily like how much distance or how much running was in a particular workout, but really look at like, hey, how long were you on your feet for? Like, you know, the walking counts. Like, don't discount the walking, the warm up. All that time is time on your feet, and you're getting out there and you're raising your heart rate, getting into that zone 1, zone 2 cardio zones. So yeah, I tell them just don't discount all those intervals and the warm up walk, and really just look at the time on your feet.
Yeah, time on feet's an important part. Isn't it funny the parallels between when you're a new runner and trail running? Like time on feet as a trail runner is very important. And I'll go out in the trails here in Colorado and I'll run, let's just say 10 miles, but it'll take me 40 minutes longer
Yeah.
than it will here in the city of Denver because I'm running some gnarly terrain. I'm up at higher altitude. I'm running uphill, really up mountains for some of that run.
Yeah.
And you can't really use distance. You have to use time. And I've always thought it was very interesting how the approach to training for a trail runner is somewhat similar to the approach to training as a beginner because of very different constraints, but similar constraints nonetheless.
Huh. I've never actually thought of that parallel because most of the people that I work with don't run trails. But it does remind me of a woman I did a call with, and she lives like right in the heart of San Francisco. And in her run walk program, she was struggling because sometimes she would end a running interval on a really steep hill, and so she'd be doing her walk, her recovery walk, on a super steep hill, and she couldn't recover enough for her next running interval. So I was like, "Huh, that's interesting." So I had to think about it. I'm like, what does it look like if once you finish that running interval, you turn around and you do your recovery walk going downhill instead of uphill? And she's like, "Oh yeah, it's a good point." So anyways, yeah, you've got to get creative because the terrain is unforgiving. So you got to look at your time.
I was gonna say turn around and walk up the hill backwards because you're gonna be going so much slower and it's just a different stress on your body. But
Yeah,
going
that's a good
going
one too.
down the hill is probably better.
Well, both can work.
Now, we did mention trail running really briefly. I did get a question about, you know, trail running for beginners. Do you think trail running is just too hard for a beginner runner to start with? How do we think about this question?
I mean, I love running on trails, but I get that question once in a while, or it goes back to people. They live in an area where they're like, I can't find a flat area to run. Um, and so if someone comes to me with the question of that, or they live on trails that are not flat, um, again, yeah, basically echo what you said. You really have to go back and focus on your effort and ignore your pace. And sometimes that might mean you're doing a running interval or your run, and your heart is at you up zone 2, even you creep into zone 3, which is fine, but you're going like a turtle pace. And I'm like, if that's the pace you need to go at to stay in your perceived effort level, then that's the pace you need to go. So yeah, and of course there's always the safety issues of running on trails, making sure you're safe and running at night and your footing and so forth. There's a whole other element of things to consider, which I'm sure you know a lot about more than me because you're running trails a lot more living in Colorado. But yeah, those are the things I would think about.
Yeah, I'm not super concerned with the footing. I mean, I think you do get better at navigating some of that more technical terrain with experience. So if you're a
Mhm.
beginner and you're not really sure, it's just going to be you're dancing along the trail rather
Yeah.
than running along the trail, right? Um, and so I'm not too concerned with that. You can always just slow down. Even the best trail runners in the world trip and fall on their faces, a couple times a year. It comes with the territory. It's more the elevation changes, which can be a real challenge for beginners because that increases their heart rate. They just don't
Right.
have the fitness built up yet to handle those bigger uphills. Now, I've also run trails that are completely flat. So it totally depends on the trail, in my view. If you're gonna do very technical, high altitude, running up a mountain type trails, I would say let's save that for, 6 months from now when you've built up
Right.
some fitness. But if you're just going to go run in the local conservation land for a mile or two and there's some clear, flat dirt paths, I think that's probably even better than running out on the road. So, yeah, not all trails are made the same. So it totally depends.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Now, you also mentioned strength training, and I can't agree with you more that I think strength training is probably the most important for likely two cohorts of runners. There's the beginner runner, and then there's the more performance oriented runner. So, much like the parallels between trail running and beginners, I think there's some real parallels with strength training and beginner runners and more performance oriented runners. How do beginners get started with strength training that is going to help their running? We obviously don't want to be in the weight room, throwing around as much weight as possible, trying to get as big as possible. That's not really going to help our running goals. But how do we build that habit, especially if we're not someone who's used to exercising regularly?
Yeah, no, yeah, I echo the sentiment about strength training. It's, you know, as important as the running itself if you want to be, a runner for life. Um, and I take the same sort of philosophy with the strength training as I do the running, especially for people who are coming off the couch, that either never run or haven't run in 10, 15 years. It's the same philosophies: start slow, start gentle, build the habit, make it super easy so they come back for more, thinking, wow, that wasn't that bad. And what that translates into as far as like what a sample little routine would be, for the first 3-4 weeks of my beginner plan. I literally have people doing body weight squats, um, maybe a glute bridge thrown in there, and then a plank. Maybe those three exercises. Maybe there's one or two more, but super simple things that can translate into the running. And no weights, just body weight, and yeah, and perform that, maybe 2 times a week to start, and you can, ramp that up to maybe 3 times a week as you get stronger and you build up your confidence. But yeah, keep it super simple, and progress from there. And then, of course, as you get a bit stronger and you get accustomed to those exercises, you can introduce some new ones or some progressions. Maybe you're going from a front plank to a side plank, or instead of body weight squats, you're introducing like a lunge or a side lunge, just to work those dynamic movements in a bit different angles, and challenge the body a bit more.
I often deal with the runner who is new to running, but isn't new to lifting weights.
Mhm.
Maybe they come from a team sport background. Maybe they're just really into weightlifting. And so this is a very different type of runner than the runner who's new to all exercise. They're new to
Right.
running, but they know their way around the weight room. How would you advise this kind of runner to maybe change their weightlifting habits a little bit so that it's a bit more conducive to their new running habit?
Yeah, I mean, I think from that standpoint, you want the weight training to complement their running and improve their running, and not, take away from their running. Like, you don't want to, one, it take too much bandwidth of your time and leave you no time for running. Soreness, if you're doing, deadlifts with 300 pounds and it leaves you sore for 3 days, well, that's not going to help your running either. And then looking at, just making sure you're doing functional stuff for running. So it's strengthening those areas that need to be targeted for running. And that might include, some lunges, maybe improving the tightness and the strength of your core, um, and not doing the stuff that's, the muscles that are, for show, that you don't need massive lats for running, for example.
But Mark, I
Or
want to look good at the beach.
okay, well, you can't have it all, Jason.
Yeah, the way I think about this too is it also depends on how often this hypothetical athlete is in the gym. So if you're
Yeah,
lifting heavy weight like a bodybuilder 5 or 6 days a week, one of my suggestions is to lift less. Let's
yeah.
just not spend as much time in the weight room.
Well, yeah. It's what are your goals? I mean, what's your priority here? Is it getting ripped, or is it becoming a better runner? So I think, start there, and then you tailor your workouts and program accordingly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, there are certainly physiologically competing goals, right? Like you can't, if someone comes to you and is like, I'm going to train for my first 100-mile race and this bodybuilding competition that I'd like to enter, those goals are somewhat contradictory. and you're likely going to just end up being mediocre at both rather than excelling at one of them.
Yeah,
So,
it's like a 100-meter Olympic champ wanting to compete in that and the marathon in the same Olympics. It's like, you're probably hurting your chances in both.
right, right. You're probably not going to be you're going to be last place in both probably.
Yeah.
So it's a good way of thinking about things. Figure out what you want to do and then train accordingly. So let's talk about a specific training goal. Let's say there's a runner that has been training, running consistently for a couple months. One of the questions I received was, how long should it take to train for a marathon? Now, this is a loaded question because it completely depends on what this kind of runner is up to in their current training, right? So, um, what do you think? How long should it take based on a couple different runner profiles?
I mean, yeah, say someone started from ground zero and they've been running for a couple months. Um, so they've built up a bit of endurance and strength, and that might get them to running, a 5K comfortably. Maybe they're creeping up towards like a 10K, but yeah, I mean, if you're starting from ground zero, like you know, I'd be hesitant to say you'd want to run a marathon in less than a year's time, unless you have gotten sort of a run walk strategy in place, and you're purely looking just to finish, and there's no time goals related to that goal. Yeah. And if you've got performance goals in mind, like, yeah, I'd say you need like sort of at least a year of, solid, consistent running with accompanying strength training.
I sort of have the unpopular opinion that new runners shouldn't really run marathons. I think the marathon is a distance that is extraordinarily difficult. I think it's a distance that needs to be respected. And it takes a long time to get comfortable running for hours and also running for hours, at a decent clip, not at a pace that's, your very slow plodding, jogging recovery pace, but a pace that you actually want to run a marathon at. And I typically like to tell runners, let's be comfortable running, say, a 10-mile or 16-kilometer long run, at least 16 to 18 weeks out from the marathon. So
Right.
that's sort of my very basic baseline rule. If you're not comfortable running that kind of a long run that far out from the marathon, you likely don't have the time to build the distance safely, because it's all about building your long run so that you can actually finish the marathon distance.
Yeah.
Um,
What surprised me actually, and I've heard from a lot of people in my sort of running audience, is a lot of them they build up to a marathon, but they never have visions of running continuously for a marathon. They're perfectly happy to do sort of a run walk strategy, which Jeff Galloway made very popular, and that's awesome. Like, if that's what you want to do, that's amazing. Like, just doing a marathon in itself is a fantastic feat. So yeah, anyways, that surprised me that a lot of people they're not that concerned about running the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm with you that finishing a marathon is something that so few people do. And because I think it's a very difficult event, I'm always impressed by anybody who runs a marathon. But I just want them to have a good time doing it and stay healthy during the training process and the race itself.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, my first marathon, it crushed me.
I mean, you
Yeah,
and me both, buddy.
I remember I ran my first marathon in Dublin, Ireland, and I was about 30K through, and my wife had found her way to where I was in the course, and I ran by, and she just looked at me. She's like, "Are you okay?" Like, my face was like white. My running form had totally deteriorated. Yeah, it was that last 12.2K or whatever was it was a struggle.
Oh, everyone has a nightmare first marathon story, right? I remember my first marathon, and this I think is funny because I was so confident going into this race. I was a couple years out of college. I had run cross country and track in college. So, I felt quick. I felt fast. I was like, hey, I'm a competitive runner. I should be successful at this distance. And it was the most humbling experience of my life to run the 2008 New York City Marathon, thinking I was going to run like 2:36, negative split the race, and finish with a 5:30 mile through Central Park. No, no, it was the most cliche experience ever. I hit the wall at mile 20. At mile 24, like the senior citizen came flying by me and put me in my place and really taught me that my youthfulness is not worth as much here on this marathon course. And it made me respect the distance a lot more. And I think I try to bring that into my coaching where, look, this is hard and it's going to humble you. Let's make sure that we're actually prepared for this distance and not rush into things because, not only can you get hurt, but you just leave the race feeling like, oh man, this is a failure. I didn't accomplish what I was setting out to do if you slow down so much by the end.
Yeah, and then after the race, you say, "I'm never doing that again," and then a week later, you sign up for your next one.
Yeah. Well, if I did these things differently in my training, I'd do so much better, right? It's that
Yeah,
typical runner's mentality.
yeah, totally.
Now, let's do a couple quick questions before we wrap for today. What are your thoughts on static stretching for beginners? You almost always get this question from beginners.
Yeah, I I don't. I've gone back and forth on stretching a lot, and the advice I sort of give now, and a lot of them come to me like, "Where's do you have a stretching routine?" And I tell I don't really prescribe any stretching. I said, do a dynamic warm up, and obviously include the strength training in your program, um, but only stretch if you like stretching. If it makes you feel better and faster, then I say go for it. Stretch. For me, I've never found that much value in stretching. I've never felt it's added a lot of value to my running. Obviously, you need to have, you know, a sufficient range of motion to go through the running motion properly. But once you've got that, yeah, my advice is sort of, stretch if you like it and enjoy it, and you maybe enjoy doing yoga. I say go for it. But if it's not your thing, do focus on the running, the dynamic warm up, and your strength training.
Yeah, I'm in 100% agreement with you there. What about for the runner who gets bored when they go running? How do you pass the time mentally when you're out there running?
Oh, good question. Actually, had um, his name escapes me now, but sort of a sports psychologist specialist write a blog article for me, and he had some amazing tips. Um, one thing I do is, in their earbuds in some of my running plans, there's audio cues, and it sort of tells people, if they're doing a good job. It gives you their splits, tells them when they're halfway, which is a huge thing. People like to know. They don't like to know anything up until the halfway because it's demoralizing. But psychologically, they like to know once they're past halfway that they're, those kilometers or miles are checking off, or the intervals are checking off, and so they're getting close to being finished. Um, Music is super helpful. Like I don't listen to music anymore or podcasts. That it just clutters my mind. But for many, it's super motivating and they love it. It keeps their mind off the running. The one thing with music and listening to things too is they make sure it doesn't take away from your noticing things with your body and your breath. I find often if you got music cranked, you can't really hear, oh wow, I'm actually breathing super hard right now. So you always want to stay tuned with your body. But music's super helpful. Also, a running buddy, it's amazingly, and for accountability purposes, I do a lot of road biking now, and I've got two guys in my neighborhood. We meet at 5:30 in the morning on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that accountability is huge for just making self that you're there and motivating you, because like, hey, I got to get there. These guys they're waiting at the corner 3 blocks away. It's 5 degrees Celsius, and if I don't show up, I'm really letting them down. And then having small achievable goals. Community is huge too. If you've got people you can share your journey with, that's important, and you can, find that in different places. There's lots of really good online communities for runners, beginner runners. There's also perhaps, running clubs at your local running shop. Finding a group of runners who's like at the same stage of you is super, super helpful and motivating.
Yeah, I'll echo the community aspect of things. I feel like when I started running, I had a cheat code available to me because I started running for a team and I had a coach, and I had so much accountability built into my training all the time. I had to go to practice every day. And if I'm skipping practice for bad reasons, I'm just going to get kicked off the team. And I don't want that to happen. And
Right.
then later in life, it was running with friends and making sure that I had those training buddies who were relying on me. That I think is likely the most effective way at keeping you consistent and accountable and actually on track with your training, because the last thing you want to do is let people down who are relying on you. So yeah, I'm also amazed that you're cycling in the winter in Toronto, Mark. Are you crazy?
Well, hey, that temperature I alluded to, that was actually the spring. That's a spring temperature. But no,
Okay.
we're not actually. Some right now we don't have any snow, but some people do ride all year, which is crazy. Um, I don't. I typically have a bike trainer. I'll train, inside on my bike trainer, and then yeah, funny enough, I do more of my running in the winter than I do the summer here because I like to bike a lot, and I've got this local cycling club that I'm a member of. But I actually like running in the winter and the snow and stuff. I don't know about you.
Yeah, winter training is in a lot of ways a little bit easier than summer training, and I always like to take out one of my best friends is a very good runner, but he used to say in the summer, or no, I got to get this right. He said, "In the heat, I don't compete," which is a great way of saying it's just too hot to really do anything too hard or fast. So that's a great
Right.
time for like base building or like long rides, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with that.
All right, Mark, one more quick question for you. This is a very common beginner one. How do I get started with running and not ruin my knees?
Yeah, good question. A lot of people come in with knee issues or past knee issues. I mean, I think there is a little bit of a misconception. Again, I think there's scientific research out there, and there's been articles written in various places that running in itself does not destroy your knees. It's not going to give you bad knees as you age. If anything, it's actually going to strengthen your knees, and you'll have less knee issues as you age and get older. Um, but with anything, with any body part or injury concern, it goes back to starting slow. Start where you're at, progress super slowly, increase, um, include the strength conditioning, and I'm having to go that right now. I actually tweaked my MCL a few weeks ago, and a funny story. I went to the physio and he gave me some great exercises, and I asked when he thought I should start running. He's like, "Well, are you familiar with a run walk protocol?" And I was
You
like,
know who
"Yeah,
I am.
I'm very familiar." So yeah. Anyways, building up slowly, and then pay attention to your body. Listen to your body. If you notice things deteriorating, your knees bothering you more, the more you run, then take a step back, and then maybe that's the time you check in with your physician or whoever your medical professional is that you normally deal with. But yeah, listen to your body. If you find running makes things get worse, you check in. If you find it staying the same, well, just pay attention to that as well.
Yeah, Mark, you're actually right that running is protective of your knees. But, also, like you said, you can use running to destroy your knees if you do it improperly. If you go from 0 to 10 miles a day, you're probably going to get hurt and it might be your
Right.
knees. Whereas if you are gradual, and I think what you mentioned is really key. There's like the three-part, solution to this problem. It's number one, go gradually, go slowly. Progressive overload has to happen, according to your body's desires, not your training plan or what you think how you should be progressing. Then there's also like be consistent with strength training, because we do want to protect our joints from all the impact forces of running. Um, and then there's the listen to your body, make sure that you're going to the PT if things are feeling a little bit off. And I think that's a really good approach. But for anyone who thinks that running is inherently bad for your knees, it's not true. It's actually protective. And I think that's a very encouraging thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, yep, keep running.
Keep running. Actually, it can be protective of your knees, especially as you get older. And I think both of us want to keep running well into our golden years. Now, you've one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is because of your None to Run community, and you are just immersed in the beginner runner community. A lot of folks who are getting started to run, learning about the sport, maybe thinking about getting involved in their first 5K, their first race. It's just so exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about, what you've built?
Sure. Yep. None to Run is basically it's a resource, community, and an app for all tailored for beginner runners, like people starting from ground zero, and place where they can build up. It's a place where you'll find other beginner runners like you, which is super important. I talked to someone the other day, and I was like, "How'd you find None to Run?" He's like, "Well, I just did some research on the internet and I came across your site and I saw pictures of people who looked like me. And that was, it's easy to go to Runner's World and other, various resources for runners. And you see these super fit, thin people and, people can be quick. And that's not me. I'll never be a runner, but no, like anyone can be a runner, and runners come in all shapes and sizes. So Nine to Run is a place for it's super inclusive. Everyone's welcome. Everyone's a runner. If you throw on those shoes and you get outside or on the treadmill, like you're a runner. So it's just a place where we really echo that sentiment and trying to get people to realize that there isn't one image of what a runner looks like, and anyone can be a runner. If they do the right things, and start slowly. So yeah, that's the gist of it. We've got blog articles. There's the app, running plans. But the thing that I enjoy the most, and I think a lot of people find useful, is just there's a community aspect, where all these beginner runners come in and they share their workouts. They ask each other questions. They'll get gear recommendations. Just a place where there's people like them, which is they feel like they belong.
I love it. You're really helping the sport grow by getting more people involved in it and helping those new runners develop the healthy habits that are going to have them have some longevity in the sport. And I just think that's awesome. So, Mark, thanks for all you do for the running community. I've known you for about 10 plus years now, and you've always been someone who has been so supportive of all the runners in your life, and I've always picked that up on you. So thanks for everything.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, I guess my goal too, also with None to Run, is once these people they graduate from me, they're going to come into your world and they're going to work on getting even stronger and faster and tackling those mountains and trails. So, anyways, thanks for all you do for the running community as well.
Appreciate that, Mark. Thanks again.
Thank you.